Hey, this is Marjorie Wildcraft, and on this episode of TGN on the Road, I'm here by the beautiful red cliffs in the river valley of the Animas River of southwest Colorado. Just a stunning scene. And this episode is going to be just a little bit different because we're going to be spending time with two enterprising young commercial organic farmers, talking to them a little bit about the reality of what farming is like and things that you could do if you're interested in doing this, how to get started and things to think about and prepare for it. Well, you know, commercial farmers work all the time. So Max and James said, hey, you know, we really need to get these beets harvested. So we said, let's do the interview while you're working. So please pardon a little bit of our wind noise, but here we go. And who I've got here with me is Max Fields, and James Plate is actually over there. This young man's name is Kale, believe it or not. And the name of their business is Fields to Plate, right?
Yep, Fields to Plate Produce, exactly.
And Max, is that really your last name? Fields?
I know, I get asked that all the time. We did not change our last names. That is my last name from birth, I swear.
But that is totally the perfect name.
I know, and James and I have known each other since kindergarten too. We've known each other quite a while, so it came together real beautifully, you could say.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about farming. I know one of the biggest myths of farming is that you have to own a lot of land. Right. Do you all own this property here, or? No, this ranch is owned by someone else who we connected with through a land link program, actually. Mm-hmm. It's a 195-acre ranch, and we lease 8 acres for our vegetable production and then help on the ranch as well. Can you tell me a little bit more about that land link? What is that program all about? That sounds Gladstone Land Link is the name of the company, I guess, the operation, and their main mission is to link beginning and young farmers, or just farmers without immediate access to capital or land from their family or any other sources, and they link landowners with those farmers. So they've actually been around for a little while, and we recently connected with them after we went through a farming incubator program, which was, it was up at the old Fort Lewis property that's owned by Fort Lewis College up in Hesperus. So once we were done with that, we were looking for a new spot to lease land and kind of went to Gladstone and found this beautiful match here. So that program was started in 2013, the same year that Fields to Plate started. And that program is very similar to any other business incubator program that you might be familiar with. Exactly, they provide a minimal amount of infrastructure, land obviously, and access to water. Those 3 main things. And by providing that for farmers, you can kind of give them a jumping off point to starting their own business, getting their toes wet, and getting a feel for what it's like to commercially farm or backyard farm. I mean, really it's not geared towards any particular type of farming operation. That's just kind of what we fell into. Leasing land is a beautiful thing and an underrated thing. I think we found a great match out here with the beautiful setting and fertile soil and adding diversity to his existing farming operation. So how much land do you need? I mean,
right.
How much are you farming here, and then what would you say somebody could start out with?
Oh, we started out small. So we started out, our main mission, we were growing at 7,600 feet. Here we're at 6,600 feet. And so we're a little bit lower, but up in Hesperus, we were actually really limited with an extremely short frost to frost growing season. So we had at most 90 days of frost-free growing. So that made us then think, okay, what are we going to be able to grow so we can not only be profitable, but grow something that's going to grow well and be able to have
income into the shoulder seasons when we're not able to produce. And beets and carrots came to be that those two things. And so we grew a ½ acre of produce our first year in business, and we did a ½ acre of red beets and a ½ acre of orange carrots. And from there, we now operate on almost 6 acres of production, a lot more diversity, but the majority of the farm is still orange carrots and red beets. So
you like the beets. You like the beets and carrots because you can store them, and that way you'll have something.
No, and that's what I was getting around to, is that you can store these products so readily. And we had access to a root cellar up there, so that was also a huge thing. We wanted to utilize the existing infrastructure, and beets and carrots, depending on the variety and the way in which you grow them, can store up to 6 months in the cellar outside of the ground. So that's what we're doing right now.
What's your most lucrative crops? I mean, where are you making your money on?
We're definitely making our money on carrots. Like I said, the orange carrots, the red beets, and this year we've really had our eyes open to broccoli. It's been a huge crop for us this year, and we'll probably grow a lot more broccoli in the future and continue that market, because there's just a big demand for it, and it grows really well in like I said, in those cold, short season environments.
So you're farming about 6 acres, and I gather there's a team of about 7 of you that are doing it?
Well, really, during harvest season, we always have more hands out here. But in the normal season, it's James, me, Axel, and Kale. So there's 4 of us that really run the farm all year long and do the majority of the work up until harvest season. We've actually doubled our acreage every year we've been in business, and we've been able to do that. We just added these guys on this year, and that's mostly because we were at a point where our production is high enough to where we just can't take care of it all on our own, and we haven't been able to invest in the proper equipment to require less hands, and plus these guys are just great. But
now, is it somewhat of an advantage to lease your land rather than own it? I know that's true in most other forms of farming, because the lease is actually because of the tax laws, right? The lease, you can write off that as an expense.
Right, exactly. And a lot of people, we have an aging group of farmers, and so there's tons of folks out there who have tons of land, beautiful, fertile land. They don't want to farm themselves anymore, but they still want it farmed. So that's where the Land Link programs come in again, is finding those people. And that's very, similar to who we found here through Dave, who's the landowner here. There's tons of land available, and it's just about making the right connection and making sure both parties are satisfied with what's going on. I think that's really the hardest part, is to make sure everyone's on the same page, because yes, leasing land is more lucrative because you don't have to invest in the expense of land, which is huge, obviously. But there's a lot more obstacles that come along with farming with someone else or on someone else's land.
The relationship's a lot more challenging.
No, it comes down to, it comes down to being personable and making sure, like I said, all parties are satisfied. And that takes a lot of communication, lots of communication.
So I've just run into Dave Coberly, who is the owner of this land, and we're in partnership, I guess, with Max and James. And did you meet through the Land Link program then?
I guess somebody told me, or I saw on the internet, that there was young farmers who needed land. And so, well, I've got land and I've got water. And
how has that worked out? Has there been any stresses in the relationship, or?
Well, no, not so far. I mean, we have lots of challenges, but I mean, these guys are hard-working guys, and so, anybody that wants to work hard and proves that that's what they're all about, I'm more than willing to help.
That's right. So, yeah. And do you get free beets and cabbage?
Yeah. Yeah, but most importantly, we're using the land and we're using the water. And, I believe that a valley is for growing food.
Yeah.
And so there's already people that would like to see these parcels get smaller and more homes, more asphalt. You know, there'll be a strip mall out here in no time if
Right.
if we don't farm it or people don't use the land. But as these guys have found already, the crop is huge this year because this is unbelievably fertile land.
This
naturally.
is river bottom
Right,
land.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just what you should be used for.
It should, yeah. The water's here, the soil's here, and yeah, it should be used to grow food.
Well, Dave, I really, really appreciate your wisdom and willingness to do that. That's, yeah.
So I from San Diego. And if you've been to San Diego, there's a huge valley there, Mission Valley. San Diego River runs through it, and I don't know, 60 years ago, it was 2 dairy farms. That's what was in that valley. And now it is, you know, a stadium and strip malls and Costco and condos and asphalt, and no one grows anything out there, golf courses. And so I said to my stepson one day, I said, Robbie, can you imagine someday this will be like Mission Valley? Just a bunch of condos and Costco's. And he looks at me and says, no way. And I go, well, 60 years ago, if you were standing in Mission Valley, you'd say the same thing.
Where do you sell your produce primarily?
Well, we do a lot of wholesale. That's what really, the majority of our produce will go to wholesale, meaning we do business with the 9R school district in Durango.
Oh, nice.
We
Getting
do
the local food into the local
oh yeah,
school
no,
system.
that's
great.
we love that, and
Yeah.
that's a great thing. And they buy quite a bit of food from us as well, so they keep us going. And then we have a lot of wholesale accounts with natural grocery stores in town. We do business with, you know, quite a handful of restaurants out there as well. And then we do farmers markets. We've done more in the past. We're focused on just Durango this year because that one always seems to be the best, at least until we can move up to Telluride and maybe do some market up there, which is our eventual goal.
Yeah, it looks like you have a lot of fun, and here's an image where you had this turnip.
Oh yeah.
That, you know, you had this game going at the farmers market. How much does this
guessing
turnip
game.
weigh? Yeah, that was really fun.
And yeah, and like I said, that's such a huge part of our sales at market is the education and providing that education for our customer base who, they might not normally buy a beet or even think of buying a beet unless you are saying, oh, hey, this beet provides all these nutritional benefits for you. You can do this with this beet. You can eat the greens, and we're just happy-go-lucky the entire time, and people want to talk to us, and so.
Well, you guys were having a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I was like, whoa, is that thing 11 pounds or 13 pounds?
Just hooting and hollering, we love it.
Yeah.
We have a good time. We don't get off the farm much, so once we do, we get let loose,
So Max, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face running an operation like this?
As I was kind of describing before, just getting efficient with your task is one of the biggest challenges.
Is labor the biggest cost then?
Yeah, it would if we counted it. Yeah, if we paid ourselves every hour every minute we were in this field, it would be our biggest cost, and we do have to factor that in, even if we can't necessarily afford to pay ourselves a full salary right now.
Right.
So yeah, labor is a huge thing, and because obviously vegetables, you have a relatively low price point per pound, so you have to grow a certain quantity to be able to cover your costs, including labor. And so getting efficient with that is just really one of the biggest challenges, I would say. And besides that, it's marketing. It comes down to marketing. So marketing your product effectively is more than half the battle farming. I mean, you can grow as much produce as you want in a given year, but if you have no marketing skills or no people skills to be able to get rid of that produce, then all you have is a big compost pile,
How did you set up those relationships with the wholesale in the restaurants? That sounds like that's one of your biggest outlets, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely it is. And the way we set that up was really grassroots. So we literally would go door to door
knocking on these businesses' doors, asking to talk to head chefs, owners, whatever, the general managers, whoever we needed to talk to say, hey, this is us, this is what we're doing, and this is what we plan on doing for a while. And what those accounts like to hear is the consistency aspect, because they want to buy local food, but the problem with it is our short growing season, and everyone tends to provide local food for a very short period of time throughout the year. And so our goal from the get-go was to be able to provide that food for a longer season and at a consistent supply. So yeah, we can do 200 pounds of beets for 30 weeks. We can do that kind of volume. So
I guess you're competing with the commercial systems that can deliver a beet or a tomato at any time of the year in any quantity. So
exactly.
You've really got to work with that, huh?
You have to work with the way that they're used to ordering, the folks who are buying your food, and that is just how that's just how it is. They're used to ordering off the truck from a price list. They want to see a price list with quantities and where they're getting discounts, if they buy bulk, those kind of things. And so getting as close as we can to the way that the commercial trucks operate is good, but then we separate ourselves from that with the quality of our food and the care we put into growing our food, because we are, when it comes down to it, we're small scale farmers. We're small, very small farmers.
Right, 6 acres is not
It's
much.
nothing.
Yeah.
But we can produce a lot of food on it, enough to be able to market it wholesale. And so we do have to meet those standards,
Yeah. What would you say for somebody who's maybe been a good backyard gardener for a while and they're thinking, hey, I might like to go commercial and sell some of my produce? What would you recommend, like 3 tips to getting started, or what would you?
I would say right off the bat, do one thing and do it good. That's the key, and that's where we've had a lot of our success. Is we from the get-go, we focused on 2 things, but one thing, let's say root vegetables. Root vegetables is what we focus on, and we do it in bulk and we do it good, and we know how to make it efficient as far as the labor that goes into caring for these things, and we're constantly making those processes more efficient as well. So that's the number one thing. If you want to go commercial, do one thing and do it good. The networking with people in this town and creating positive relationships with the folks that are potentially could buy your food is the biggest thing in the world, because they're going to say, oh, hey, I know these guys, they do this, and we know this guy, and this guy wants to buy from you, and so it just spreads like a really good virus and in a positive way. And so networking and focusing on one thing is, I would say, those are my 2 biggest pieces of advice as far as commercial farming goes.
So Max, how do you, fertility is always such a big issue. This valley is naturally fertile, but you can't just take from it. How do you replenish this, and what do you use for fertility?
Well, as a lot of modern day organic farmers, we rely heavily on green manures or cover crops. So once we're done harvesting this field, in order to replenish it for the next year, what we'll do is we'll come in, and we like to seed out ryegrass and purple hairy vetch, which is a nitrogen fixing plant.
Yep.
And we'll seed that out in our fields in the fall in the hopes that it will germinate a little bit, but mostly over winter. And then by the springtime, all that seed will shoot up out of the ground, and come March or April, we'll have a stand of cover crop this tall. And from there, we'll flail mow it and then disc it all into the ground, and that adds a ton of organic matter and also supplemental nitrogen year to year. And then from, our eventual goal, really down the road, is to be able to rotate entire fields. So ideally, we have a few 5-acre sections, say, that are fenced off. We'll call it a 3-year rotation.
cover crop, sheep, vegetables.
Ah, so you're looking at getting some
So
livestock.
looking at rotating up to, we actually do have livestock. We have we raise the Navajo churro sheep,
Oh, okay.
and we're looking to really amp up our flock to around a couple hundred, so we can end up grazing all the land that we do have here on the ranch, and not only add nutrients to the soil, but you know, have a product being the lamb meat to be able to sell in the meantime as well. And then so the cover crop mixed in with the rotation of the sheep, and then being able to produce after those two things have been executed in the field, you're going to end up with an extremely fertile field from year to year, and then rotating and only coming back to this field every 3 to 5 years, something like that.
Nice.
And so that would be ideal, and that would only take around 15 acres, which is really this whole plot. You know, we could chunk this thing up and do that throughout the years.
How about watering and irrigation, or are you just, because this is river bottom land and it's moist, are you dryland farming, or how do you water?
No, you can actually even see the irrigation out here, but we overhead sprinkle from pumps. So we have water come in through the ditch, fill the pond, we pump out of the pond, and most of the field is irrigated with sprinklers, overhead sprinklers. We don't use drip for a couple reasons. I think it's just kind of a pain, and it's a little bit wasteful. It's a lot of petroleum product. These things are reusable year to year, even though they aren't quite as efficient as drip irrigation. In my opinion, the cost kind of balances out. And then we also flood irrigate all of our large seeded crops. So we flood irrigate squash and we flood irrigate potatoes. And that's, you know, that's also because we are just so fortunate to be able to have so much water that we are able to water like this. So in another situation, it might not be conducive to do that, but in the situation we're in now, this is how we're used to farming it, and it works well, and it's pretty efficient as well.
Well, since you said consistency and the ability to store these root crops are so impressive, we're going to actually follow you to the root cellar that you have where you store these. So that's going to be really cool.
Yeah, you guys are going to enjoy it down there. It's really cool.
All right, I'd like to introduce you to the better half of the Fields to Plate business and partnership. Before we were talking to Max, and now we have James.
That's correct.
And you know, James, I was talking to Max, and he was saying that one of the most crucial things that made your business a success was you were able to consistently provide produce. That's what all the wholesale, the restaurants, and the different schools wanted, was they wanted consistent delivery. And a key part of that was, one, was growing crops that could be stored, and then the other is the storage component. So I'm here with you by your root cellar where you store stuff.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about the root cellar you've got here?
Yeah, so basically the root cellar is a off-the-grid unit. We're fortunate in this situation to have grid power with electricity inside here that we simply just use for lights. We can power tools as we work on it.
But you're not using it for refrigeration.
We're not using the electricity for refrigeration. The structure itself uses the insulation from the earth to insulate it from freezing and allows it to stay cooler than structures that are above ground.
You know, I got to tell you, I was kind of envisioning that we would go down in a hole in a cave, but this actually has a roof on top, and it's mostly just buried into the side of this hill, and
right.
It's mostly the earth bermed up that
Absolutely.
really provides the insulation.
Yeah, I mean, we're on the east side of the valley wall right here that slopes down pretty exponentially, so it was pretty easy just to excavate some earth. This structure that we're at was built in the 1900s, early 1900s. And so how they were, able to move this much earth back then is kind of a feat, but...
Oh my gosh, yeah, come to think of it, right? They didn't have bulldozers back in the 1900s.
Right.
Huh?
When we move inside, you'll see that it's built with all river rock and, rock from off the hillside here, just pretty much stacked up with mortar. So it's a pretty archaic structure that's stand the
Test of
stands
time,
times,
and
yeah,
it's still
and
functional, huh? Yeah.
still functions. One of the major components to a root cellar that we look for, this isn't the first one that we've used, but is that it has open airways. So we want to allow cool air in down low, which will settle and then heat up and rise and escape. So it's kind of this constant movement of cool air sinking, heating, rising, and escaping.
So this is better than a cave in the ground,
Right?
Because you've got that circulation for air.
Right, and it'll, we can keep a high humidity. The vegetables themselves will actually put off a lot of moisture, just being present here. But we get it to work for our situation for a number of different crops that aren't true root vegetables, and we can get them to store well. It's really hard for, in a true root cellar that we would build, we would design it and have the ability to let it sit right around 32 to 35 degrees.
That's the optimal temperature for storing?
With about 90% humidity.
Oh my gosh, okay, yeah.
And we could do that in a structure that, if we built it, but with working with structures such as this where they're just so old, rodents, wild animals, everything that will burrow in them.
How do you handle that? I bet you do have mice and things.
I'll show you.
Yeah.
When we move in, how we mitigate rodents,
Okay.
And things like that.
About how big is this building?
This building is probably about, I want to say 800 square feet.
Okay, so not that big, but
No, it's not 800 to 1,000 maybe. So probably about it's probably about 40 by 50 to 60 feet deep.
And you're leasing this building, right? This is not something that you
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we before we moved onto the property that we're growing on now, we were leasing land in Hesperus, which is 15 miles west of Durango. And there was a root cellar on that property that we had restored and got back in working order. And so after moving out here, obviously it was huge that we find a structure that we can store in. We knew the valley was popular for vegetable productions, primarily potatoes, and that there were a number of potato cellars still in existence in this valley. So we did a bunch of hunting up and down this road, speaking with folks who own these structures, and a lot of them are smaller, where they just have a door that you can walk in and maybe 200 or 300 square feet.
It wasn't enough.
Need
yeah.
something that we can back a truck into.
So really finding it was just a matter of knocking on doors, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, hugely. And then the owner of this cellar is also the master on the ditch. So we had a relationship already through him, talking water rights. And then it just evolved into discussing what we're doing as vegetable growers and finding out that he has a root cellar. And
Again, so networking, huh? I'm real curious. You mentioned like 90% humidity. How do you keep the humidity up in a building like that? I mean, this is a really dry climate here. I'm already flaking.
And something that is this old, it's difficult to maintain just a constant humidity within the structure itself. This one right now is sitting at 66%. They do stay a lot more humid than you would expect just because of the fact that they're earth in, and a lot of the earth around the structure is pretty moist.
Yeah.
And so the rocks being porous will take on a lot of that moisture and then offset it into the root cellar itself. But what we'll do is we'll take burlap and dampen it. So we store all of our produce out of the field into a woven poly grain bag that you would typically buy grain in. And that is nice because it's not airtight, so it doesn't create an anaerobic environment for the vegetables. It seals them enough that they stay nice and close together, but also still have the ability to breathe. So once we have the vegetables in those bags, which do a good job of keeping them in an environment that they would expect to be in the ground, being biennials, then we tarp that with damp burlap. And we'll periodically, depending on the conditions, how much air is moving through the structure, we may have to
re-dampen those every week or every 2 weeks, and just pull them off. We basically just soak them, let them air dry for a while so that they're just basically wet to the touch but not wringing. We don't want to create a moldy environment in there.
Good.
And then we'll tarp that, so we'll put just tarps over that, and that really just kind of allows the vegetables, once these vegetables come out of the ground, they're breathing and expelling basically oxygen and slowly breaking down. Those cells are breaking down within the vegetable. But if we can keep them damp and cool with a little bit of moisture, just as they would be if they were in the ground covered with snow, then that is how we'll be able to pull them off in March.
Got to ask you one more question before we head inside. Is this working out financially for you? Yeah, y'all are making a pretty decent living doing this?
Well, and it's all about figuring out efficiencies, obviously making it worthwhile and fun on your end, and then what do you want to make, and what is a sufficient outcome as far as income for
you're happy, huh?
For you. Yeah, exactly. And so we asked ourselves, what would it take us, what would we need to make to live happily? And we've figured that out, and it's working for us. But the goal more than that is to not just fulfill our own satisfaction as far as income, but also how do we then generate jobs for the community. So
and good food.
Right. Yeah, so we're able to employ two of our really good friends this season, and hope to employ more in the future. It's more than just vegetables too. It's a lot. There's so many different facets to this industry that will allow us to prosper financially, and that comes with value added, adding value to the raw crop that we pull out of the ground.
Well, James, you promised to tell me about those rodents and how you control rodents. I mean, that's an issue for everybody, whether they're growing big or not. So what is the solution for keeping rodents out of your stored vegetables?
Right. Well, especially in this old structure, they've got many ways to get in here
that
they've figured out. But we use hardware cloth. This is quarter by a quarter
mesh.
They come in different sized rolls as far as width, and we just basically build a wooden structure around it and line this out just like a jail cell, so that there's no theoretical way that mice or squirrels, pack rats, skunks, anything necessarily could get into these vegetables, which in the dead of winter they would absolutely love to.
Oh yeah, chow down on your beets. Yeah.
Yeah,
so you basically completely mesh the thing up and close up every little crevice, and a jail cell for your beets.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Yeah, every little crevice, yeah. And then we'll set live traps in this structure, all over, and bait them too. When you put this much effort into keeping rodents out and you leave something on the ground, you're sure to get something into the live traps.
Right.
So
I'm real curious, why do you have the boxes, cardboard on the external side?
We use wax boxes to line the outside of the structure, just basically for airflow, and so that these vegetables aren't exposed. It's hard for us to get this tarp covered onto the sides.
So it just helps to compartmentalize it a little bit.
Right. Right, and helps to keep moisture and just keep it tighter in. With the wood, the concrete, all of these things will wick moisture away from the vegetables, as well as put moisture back in. It's just kind of a constant ebb and flow. But by lining, after we wire mesh it, we line everything with wax boxes just to
have another layer in there.
Right.
Yeah. Well, James, thank you so much for showing us around, and really appreciate all the wisdom and knowledge that you've shared, and I hope that we have inspired a few of you to look into the possibility of starting to take your production to a larger level and maybe starting to sell, and following in the footsteps of James and Max. This is Marjorie Wildcraft, and I'll see you on another edition of TGN on the road.
Marjorie, guess the weight and you get a free carrot.
I'm guessing 10.8 pounds.
That's really close. Oh, it's really close.
Try again. Try
Say
again.
you're colder on the low side, warmer on the upside.
Okay, 11.3
A
pounds.
little warmer.
12.2 pounds.
A little warmer.
Oh my God, 13.1 pounds.
13.
13
13.1. She got it. Oh!
I win a carrot.
You want a carrot? I'll give you a purple one too. 'Cause they're
All right,
better.
a purple carrot here.
Red?
That is a workout.
Yeah. What do you think?